So halfway into 2026, agentic AI is still picking up speed. We're adding new topics like agentic commerce, and we're talking more about governance. But today we'll actually talk about the 3 success factors for agentic AI beyond technology. So join me for that one. Welcome back for another episode of What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they are turning AI hype into technology outcomes. Today, we'll talk about the top 3 success factors for agentic AI, success factors beyond technology, to be more precise. And I could be more excited to welcome our guest to the show, Sebastian Wernicke. Hey, Sebastian, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, Andreas. Thank you for having me. Excited and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Hey, it's been a couple of months since we've met in person.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year when I was launching my book. I know you have a new one coming out. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But maybe for those in the audience who don't know you yet, can you introduce yourself real quick and share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sebastian. I always like to describe myself as an extremely curious person. I think that's who I am. And so it's no wonder that I work in data and AI day to day. I'm a partner at Oxera, a consultancy where I lead the data science and AI team. And now I'm also an author. So we recently released the new book called Data Inspired. And yeah, this is, as you know, also as an author, this is now becoming a second job that I have, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad you're spending your time with us, and I know you've been in the industry for a long time. You've also built quite a following on LinkedIn. Folks, if you're not following Sebastian yet, head over there real quick and give him a follow. Lots of good information about data and AI that he posts there on a regular basis. And hey, if you're joining our stream just now, please drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is. And Sebastian already held up his book. If you're learning or looking to learn how you bring AI into your organization for people to use it well, consider picking up this one. The Human Agentic AI Edge came out in February. Now, in good old fashion, we'll start by kicking it off with a little icebreaker. And this one is one that has been running for a long time. And
do I need to hit the buzzer button or anything? Or
I will. I will.
Oh, you buzzer. You buzzer. Okay.
Show up here, but this is the one that I will press. So let's see. If I press it, the wheels will start spinning, and you'll see the question here. If AI were a plant, what would it be? 60 seconds on the clock. Go.
If it were a plant.
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Actually, okay. So I'm going to offend my fellow biologists. I'm not going to use a plant. I'm going to use a fungus here. So if AI were a fungus, I think it would be mycelium, which is that fungus that some people might know is growing inside of the earth, and it's connecting the trees and various organisms. And so AI is, of course, also this really big network of connections. So I think a fungus is more fitting here.
Okay, I like that. Some people have said it's a cactus. Others have had
Tricky.
other.
I like that.
With a little pointy spear. But fungus, that's a good one, right? It's probably been there for a long time too, and it keeps on growing.
Yeah, technically incorrect, as I said, but
yeah,
we'll take it.
Exactly. I mean, we're not biologists here, and at least few of us are. So now, boy, how do I segue into our actual topic? But for fungus to grow and plants to grow, we have some success factors. For agentic AI to work, we need them too, and it's not just about the technology. So we'll talk about 3, and I know we spoken about this a little bit before we went live, but maybe if you can share, what do you think are the 3 key success factors that you're seeing, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your book and what it means to be data inspired.
Oh, I think the analogy is actually perfect, because for a plant to grow, you need the right substrate, right? So not every plant will grow in every environment. And so I think for AI and particularly agentic AI, there's sort of three components that you need in your soil for it to grow and to flourish. The first one is data, because even though it's a very fancy technology, it's all grounded in data. So unless you have the right information and you have it set up in the right way, there's nothing that AI can actually use to work on. The second one, I think, is culture, because where are we using AI and agentic AI? It's not in a vacuum. It's not a pure technology topic. We are putting these technologies into enterprises. And so enterprises, even of the future, even if they are autonomous enterprises, they will still be comprised of people operating the whole thing. They will still have people making the decisions. And so we need the right culture within an organization for AI agents to actually unfold their full power and not, for example, just be used as a replacement for the process that should be replaced in its entirety, anyways. And I think the third factor for me is strategy. And I know this is a topic that can sound quite abstract to many people. But what I essentially mean by this is, so in the book, I have this headline where I say data second. So, consider
Hmm.
strategy first, consider the purpose first. And I think with AI and agentic AI, that's become ever more true. If we just say, let's do AI and don't have any idea what that means or why we're doing it or what the purpose of that is, it usually fails.
I like that. Data second. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event and someone from municipal government in attendance, and she said, "We're AI last." And everybody looked at her and like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, we have so much catching up to do that while everybody talks about AI first, we're actually on the other end of the spectrum to become AI first." So I have a lot of empathy here for data second, because we need to think about what is our strategy to begin with.
Yeah.
Now, in February, I think it was, we met near Philadelphia, and I saw one of your talks about what it means to be data inspired. But I know, obviously, not everybody here in the audience has had a chance to see it or to
Yeah.
learn more about it. What is data inspired all about? I mean, we've seen so much about data. We've read so much about data. There's been
Mm.
so much written about data. But data inspired, what is
Why
it
are we still
all about?
talking about data even, right?
Yeah.
It sometimes amazes people why we still do that. And I think there's two things to mention here. So the first one is, I think oftentimes when we talk about data, we use the term data driven, and that term has been around for quite a while. So we want to build data driven companies. We want to make data driven decisions. And the thing that I appreciate about that term is I think it tells you very exactly where you're trying to place data within the organization, right? You're basically saying, we are having too many decisions where we don't feel that we have the facts right, where maybe gut feelings are prevailing. We're having too many discussions. And usually, when somebody says we want to become a data driven company, what they mean is we want to have more information and we want to have that information guide us. We want it to help us make the right decisions. We want it to help us be faster, be more autonomous, be more automated. And so there's a lot of clarity with the term. And just to be clear, when I say data inspired, and I'll explain in a second what I mean by that, I don't mean to replace that. I think data has that place. Data is very important for measuring, for transparency, and ultimately for optimization. You just become a better and faster business if you add data to the business and you make good use of it. But I also felt that this wasn't enough in the end, because if you think about it, what's happening? Every organization is collecting more and more data. Most organizations are luckily becoming a bit better, at least at organizing the data, even though that's still a huge topic. And they all have access to the same tools to make use of data. They all have access to essentially the same dashboarding tools, now the same AI tools. So the question sort of becomes, if you only do that, if you're only striving to be data driven, how is that going to give you an edge? In my mind, data driven is essentially becoming very quickly the baseline, because if you don't use data to improve your business, you're not going to be around for much longer because it's just become a very essential tool. And so I was trying to look at, well, what's the missing component here? And if data-driven is a lot about optimization, then being data inspired is still about that, but it adds another component, which is how can we use data to transform our organization? How can we use data to drive innovation? How can we use data to find the next breakthrough product idea? How can we use data not just as this, steering wheel, but more as a compass that shows us where the future of our company might lie? And so data inspired is a term I think that I found, well, it was already around before that, but I found it was used in a way
Mhm.
that was a bit wasteful of that word inspired. It was sort of used as in a, well, we have data around and we might be a little
Right.
inspired by it. And I thought, no, 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 no. You need data actually to drive you towards the future. And so I was just thinking, let's give that word data inspired another chance, put it on the book
Yeah.
title, and then hopefully, we can actually have an inspired use for that term.
I think this part is so important about the inspiration, because there's so many technical books and works that cover how do you do the foundation. There are so many strategy books, but
Mhm.
a lot of times we miss this part that you said. When we talk about data driven, we don't talk about where do we actually want to be, what is the end state, and
Yeah.
what could we do and what can we do with the data and the information we have available. And we know that your data is never as complete and as fresh and as clean as you would like it to be or as you need it to be. So what's the inspiration? What are we going to
And so deal with that also, right? I mean, there's also some parts where I think we just have to spill a bit of truth and say, well, of course your data is never going to be perfect. And by the way, when you make an important decision, of course the data is not going to tell you precisely how you should decide. That's
yeah.
just not how complex decisions work. And yet I think, and you've heard that sentence as well, where somebody will come and say, oh, if only we have the right people to the right the right data to the right people at the right time, then suddenly magic things will happen. And first of all, usually for many decisions, that's just impossible to do. And then the other part, so there are two chapters in the book that I snuck in there that are about psychology. Oh, and so, but it turns out that this whole right data to the right people at the right time is also an illusion, because it suggests that we're essentially just operating on a data deficit. And as soon as
Mm,
we get the right data, we will be doing better and we
right.
will be making better decisions. And human psychology for decades, and the science behind it for decades, has now shown this is not the case. You can give people perfect data, and unless they are psychologically and in an organization that also means culturally prepared to use the data, nothing will happen. They will just dig in or dismiss the data that doesn't agree with them. And so this is why, besides having the right data, that cultural element becomes so important, because if you don't have a receptive culture for data, and that essentially means being prepared to be wrong, to change your mind, you don't stand a chance, even if you have the best data around that you could imagine.
So kind of seeing why we're saying beyond technology, right? The success factors
Yeah.
beyond technology. And it seems that there's a lot more of that human element again, and like I said, the culture, the leadership culture too. In some countries, we talk about a failure culture, and being open and accepting that,
Mhm.
on the path to success, you will encounter some hardships, some challenges, some failures, and they're all part of the process of learning, of getting better. But we also need to encourage this learning to happen. Otherwise, we're too
Yeah.
afraid of risks to the point that nobody's willing to take them, because there's such a big stigma around taking risks
Yeah.
and potentially not
And the most
succeeding.
interesting data comes from failing, of course,
Yes.
right? And
Yep.
and so if I want to generate interesting data, I need to be prepared to fail. I need to want to fail in a way. Of course, in a risk-controlled environment and all of that, where I'm not betting the company, but still I
Yep.
need to be willing to do that. Otherwise, I'm just generating boring data that, may allow these stepwise changes, but isn't going to drive transformation in the end.
Now, a lot of times that seems so easy, or it sounds so easy. Yes, we need to
Yeah.
embrace more failure. We need to embrace risk taking. We need to embrace innovation. But then you get stuck in the day to day. You're
Yeah, the
in the
quarterly
process.
goals. Yes.
Things that we do every time. You have some quarterly goals. You have some annual goals that you
Yeah.
really want to hit or exceed. But you get dinged if you don't. But you've taken the risks. What are you seeing there when it comes to culture? How can leaders really live and breathe that kind of change?
Yeah, I think leadership sets the tone for this. And this is a very important one. And what I always like to joke about is that I hear too many leaders trying to achieve efficient innovation in a way,
Hmm.
right? So we want innovation, but we want to do it in a very secure way. That is not possible. And so ultimately, I think it comes down to, and this is where we come to the topic of strategy. What is the strategy driving all this? If your strategy is we want to be efficient quarter by quarter, we want to hit our quarterly goals precisely for the next quarter, for the next 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters, that's fine. By the way, that is not a strategy at all. Even by
Right.
definition, that is not a strategy. But if you say that, then go ahead. But we are, of course, realizing, or everybody's realizing, we are living in a time of rapid change, of complexity, of, if you will, mega trends, right? Supply chains becoming extremely brittle, aging population. We need to see, where does our food come from? We do have climate change to deal with. We have aging populations. All of these big topics, and I think these big topics will compel you over time to be innovative, and not just in the sense of let's be innovative once and reinvent the company, but actually build companies in a
Continuous.
way that they are innovative on a continuous basis, that they become resilient, that they change is the new normal. Even though that's a bit of a cliche, I realize that, but that is the way that you need to build
Mm.
a company. And so I think this innovation topic becomes very quickly strategic. And if you want to be innovative at speed and at scale, then all of the other topics that we start to talk about, AI, agentic AI, data, they become inevitable. But this is, turning it around and not saying, oh, how can I add AI to my company as it is today, but rather saying it's a strategic imperative that we build around change and innovation. And the only way to achieve that at the speed and at the scale that we need is
Mhm.
to embrace AI, agentic
Right.
AI, data, all of these concepts.
Let's switch gears a little bit. And I know that's a question that we didn't talk about before. I mean, we had very little prep, and we said let's have a free flowing
Yeah, we
conversation,
already
and
had a buzzer,
continue
so
where we
let's go
ended
for
in
it.
yes. But something that just crossed my mind, because you talked a lot about culture, you talked about data, you talked about
Mm.
strategy. But I'm curious, as an author, what is something that you've learned in the process of writing the book? Because I'm sure it's not a 4-week project, anything but that. What was this one thing that you learned, this big revelation, maybe even, compared to where you started now with where you ended, with the published book?
Yeah. So, I mean, the book started out with many fragmented thoughts or also little frustrations. I always say that there's a bit of a not so noble way that I started writing the book, which was whenever I got into an argument with a client or on a project, I said, okay, I'm going to write that in a book one day. So I can say, sorry, but it's in the book, I didn't have to have that argument
Yes.
anymore. But then as you continue writing, of course, you're trying to find what's the red thread? What is
Mhm.
keeping all of this together? And I struggled with this for a while until I had lunch with a friend of mine who works in organizational psychology. And she said, after we were discussing about organizations and culture for a while, well, ultimately, what is an organization but a decision making machine?
Mhm.
And this notion of it's all about decision making, I think that was my biggest revelation that came
Yeah.
to me, because that ties all of it together. Why are we using data? Well, we're using it to make better decisions. That's what it's all about. If we don't
Yeah.
make better decisions, then we don't need all that data because it's quite expensive,
Yeah.
And then when we talk about AI, well, what is AI? AI is something that we can hand decisions to, mostly in the way of a recommendation engine, or
Mhm.
I mean, before that we had decision rules or we had machine learning. So it's all stepwise. we have data to influence our own decisions. At some point, we decide, well, let's hand a bit of that over to the machine. With machine learning, it's an algorithm that has learned what we care about, and we've been very precise about defining goals. With AI, suddenly that's no longer the case, right? If we define AI in the sense of large language models, they're basically trained on, does the user like what I'm saying? A very broad goal, yeah, which we also then should be careful about. And with agentic AI, it's of course then the complete handover. We're essentially just saying, oh, I'll just tell you my goal and I'll let the machine figure out everything. But decision making is what ties it all together. And so I like to talk about the decision framework that an organization gives itself and operates itself in. Because if you look at it from the lens of decision making, it becomes very clear what kind of choices you have to make ultimately. You know, what am I going to hand over to an algorithm? And if I do that, what is the nature of that algorithm? Is it something that's very controlled, or is it something where I'm happy to say, well, I'll specify a general goal and hope for the best, you know, fingers crossed and everything. But it becomes very clear through that. And that, I think, was my biggest revelation in the end. And it's a very, very useful framework to apply to this whole technology discussion in my mind.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about decision making. It's to your point about having the data to make a confident decision, whether or not the reality turns out to be, you know, right or wrong based on the decision that you've taken. But just having data, having facts to make a decision, and then making it quickly too. So to your point, now with agents, when they say we delegate more agency, we delegate more autonomy to these systems and components. How can they make decisions that are aligned with our values, that are aligned with the facts that represent the reality?
Yeah. And psychology becomes so interesting here, I find. So I distinguish, as I said, very clearly between machine learning and AI. And the interesting thing is machine learning is something where we control the decision environment quite tightly, right? So it's an example of, let's say, the classic example, the tens of thousands of cancer images, and the machine learning algorithm sort of learns, is this dangerous? Is this non-dangerous, or benign? And the thing is that people intuitively, they don't trust machine learning. So there's studies where you can show people that, for example, a prediction algorithm is superior to the predictions that you are going to make. And then you ask people, I'm going to let you bet some money. Are you going to make the choice? Is the algorithm going to make that choice? They see the algorithm making a single mistake and they will say, I'd rather do this myself. Yeah, I don't trust this thing. Yeah. And now with AI, it's so ironic because AI is trained in a much, much, much less controlled environment. As you know, we're throwing all of the data at this huge thing, which is impossible to understand in its entirety. And we're training it on this goal of, do I like what you say or not? Yeah. And still, because of the interaction mode and because it can sound so natural, suddenly we trust this thing. So there's machine learning, which statistically saying we should trust because we can prove it's better than a human. Then there's AI, where we don't, you know, basically we can't prove anything, but we say, yeah, but you know, let me tell you about my relationships, ask you for relationship advice, ask you for strategy advice, let's hand the business over. It's so ironic, I find.
For sure. And to me, that comes back to how we've learned to trust automation, in how automation has traditionally been deterministic. Every time I press the button, it switches the channel.
If then else, yes.
Right. Then we've adapted more to, you know, I need to train my thermostat, for example, especially here in the US, when Nest was a big thing. And it learns when I like it hot and cool, and when I come and when I leave the house, things like that. To your point, now delegating more and more to these systems. I'm curious though, talking about data inspired. Yes, there's data as a foundation, but we also want to see where we want to go, how data, culture, and strategy fit into this. What's the one thing? What's the first step that anyone, any leader should take to become a more data inspired business or business unit?
Yeah, I would recommend 2 steps, and they can go in parallel. I think the first step is really that strategy discussion and finding the purpose. Because without it, you are entering a large transformation without having a reason to do so. And so I think it's very, very important to understand how is doing this critical for the business? How is becoming a company that permanently innovates with data critical for the business? Unless you've discussed and answered that question, you can of course start the projects and the innovation, but we know from transformation projects, and there's tons of research on that, if you don't have a clear purpose, if you don't know where you're going, these things fizzle out. So sometimes I say transformation is like climbing Mount Everest, but not with oxygen, but with PowerPoint. And that is just very, very hard. So you need to know why you're getting yourself into that.
I love it.
Now, the other part of that is to, I think, realize that the culture discussion and the technology discussion must not happen and cannot happen in separate rooms. Right. And so we cannot just sign the check and say, let's buy the tools, let's buy the AI, which, by the way, you need to do. Yeah. This is not anti-tool. This is not anti-technology. Of course, you need the tech. But if you don't supplement the tech with that culture discussion and saying, how do we want to make decisions in the future? How are we prepared to hand over decisions to these algorithms that might or might not be trustworthy, and where our intuition about trust might be different, to have all of these other discussions. And by the way, also, the classic decision making with data isn't going away. So you also need to discuss that, because people usually are quite bad to make good decisions, even when presented with very good data. But you need to initiate that as well. So the purpose part and the how do we tie culture and technology together, I think, are two essential stepping stones that will lead you towards that path of inspiration. So yeah, I know it sounds a bit lofty, but I think ultimately, the whole. I mean, when I was writing the book, sometimes I was just thinking, oh yeah, that actually, that company I'm describing, that's a company I would like to work for. So I think ultimately it is about building more inspiring companies that spark joy in a way and energy.
We certainly need more of those.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when we look at the headlines and things are pointing in the other direction of being less inspired, maybe inspired by savings, cost savings, but not inspired by what could we do if we gave people access to this technology or
and yet
to
still,
this
isn't that that is so ironic, right? These are all things that are so well described, because that in the end is the classic innovator's dilemma.
Yes.
And it's been described technology cycle after technology cycle. Now AI comes along. What do? Seeing eyes, we're going into the innovator's dilemma.
Absolutely. Now, Sebastian, we're coming up to the end of the show, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today. We've had such a great conversation. We talked on or touched on so many important points, but what are the key 3 things that the audience should take away?
Yeah. So if you're excited about AI agents, I completely understand why you would be, but please do these 3 things. First, make sure that the data is right, because your AI agent will be using data and it needs that soil to grow in and grow in the right way. The second one is make sure that you understand that AI agents are not just buying a technology, they're all about changing your business. They're about changing your organization, how it operates, how you make decisions, and ultimately your decision making culture. So it's a culture topic. And I think the third one is, don't start the way of saying, I have a business, how do I now bolt on this technology of AI? You have to go one step deeper into the strategy discussion and really think about, what's really threatening my business? What's hard? What are the challenges? And how do I overcome these? And no worries, I think the solution in 99% of cases will be, well, we need to embrace AI. We need to embrace agentic AI, because otherwise we don't stand a chance to survive what's going to come.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much. And what's the book again that people should read and go buy?
Well, I mean, they should also buy and read your book, so definitely. But of course, I'm also hoping that they will go for data inspired as well. Well, it's a. I mean, I love your book. I think it's a very complimentary read. I think this is the culture book in hiding. I think yours very much points out all the amazing possibilities that are out there and the way to go. So read them both. Read Data Inspired and read the Human Agentic Edge. And then you'll be doing well.
Right. So some good summer reading for sure by by the lake, by the pool, wherever you are. Don't forget that. They're also available digitally and mine as an audiobook.
Yeah. But send us pictures. You know,
Yes.
and you love that as well, right? When you get these
Oh, yeah.
pictures of people in fantastic places, and they're like, "Oh, I have the book with me." Do it. Yeah, we love them.
That's a great joy for me, seeing where it pops up all across the world and what people are saying. So yes, do share it with us, tag us on LinkedIn, follow us, and we'll certainly respond. And as you can see, makes our author's heart beat super fast.
It's one of the greatest joy. If you're wondering how to bring joy to an author, it's leave a rating somewhere where other people can see it and send those pictures. Yeah, that'll be perfect.
Exactly. Wonderful. Sebastian, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Was great learning from you how to become more data inspired. And most of all, also, what are the 3 key success factors for agentic AI beyond technology?
Yeah, what a joy. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, folks in the audience. See you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.